right along at a good clip here, and right on schedule. We're now going to move to a panel discussion. I want to invite our panelists to come up here and start our first panel discussion of the day, the AM panel. Let me introduce them as they come up. We'll talk about what we have heard today, get their opinions. Their places are marked on the chairs. Find your name on the chair. We having fun yet today? Yeah? Well, that's good. Okay. We pay the electric bill? Oh, the lights are good. Let me introduce the panelists, and you can. Somebody spent 40 years in radio. I can't work a microphone. Okay. You go over here until my ears work better. Let me introduce the panelists. Dr. Toshida Nishida.
No.
Dr. Nishida. Say again. You want the lights back on? Okay, because you asked for it. We have the lights up a little because we're not going to be seeing any. Yeah, right. There's not going to be any. Great. Dr. Dora Nishihi, raise your hand. There she is. I'll take this off for now. Dr. Joan Silk, right here. Dr. David Watts. And Dr. Ann Pusey. Is that at the end? Okay. Well, I may walk back to my spot if you want to follow me. So I can. Let me see if I can get folks to react to anything they heard today before we begin our discussion. Anything you heard today that impressed you more than anything else? You learn anything really new? Yes, go ahead. Answer that.
Yeah?
I think from the last talk with Dr. Seyfarth, it suggests that maybe Facebook isn't the way to go.
Facebook is not the way to go. Why is that?
Why is that?
Yes.
Because rather than having a large number of acquaintances, it seems that we should have a few stable friends that we can rely upon, and that will help us to keep our stress levels low.
You got to have friends. Anybody else have any reaction to anything they saw today? Anything that they was left out that they thought they would have liked to see in the 40 years? Let's talk about the 40 years of research in the last 40 years. What do you think are the most important and surprising empirical findings of the last 40 years? Want to take that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
When I started graduate school, quite a while ago, but not 40 years ago, I was told that all females were basically the same. They had babies, the babies grew up, and every female was like every other female. And so I think one of the really fascinating things we've learned over the last 40 years is how that females are strategic actors in their own lives, that they vary as individuals, and that the events in their lives impact their ability to do what natural selection has in mind, which is to reproduce and produce surviving infants. And now, especially with these nice data from Maramy, we know that females change over the course of their lives, their status matters, and now we know that the kinds of social bonds that they're forming really have a huge impact.
Anybody else want to jump? Go ahead.
Well, I think what we're still learning is about the life history patterns. Because
Hang on. Let me grab it and I'll give you this mic.
Okay.
The backup mic.
Okay.
That will beam you to Mars. You want to
Well, when I first got to Gombe, which was about 10 years into Jane's study, what we were only just beginning to know was how long it took infants to grow up. And there was a female who Jane said, "You better go and see if she's still nursing." And she was by that time 5 years old. And now we know that the life history is just very long and slow in these apes. They don't have their first babies. Chimps don't have their first babies on average till they're 14. They only produce a baby every 5.5 years. And then what we're only now finding out is how long they live, because it takes They live longer than 50 years. We haven't even got to 50 years in these long-term studies. And what now we are beginning to realize is that their reproductive life history, that females, it's really very different from people. They start up a bit earlier. They go on, apparently later, they actually produce babies into their 50s sometimes. And so it's very interesting to look at the changes in human evolution where birth spacing is more, the reproductive lifespan's shorter, but babies are produced more frequently. And speculate, as I know people will later on, about why that is.
Did you want to just jump in?
Yes.
Dr. Watts.
This is working. But before we get to empirical findings, I'd like to emphasize the importance of developments in methodologies. And you've been hearing about some of them, including, and you'll hear more about genetics later today, but you've been hearing about the ability that people have now to get data on hormones from wild animals without having to even touch the animals in any way. And you have also heard about some other methodological improvements. Robert Seifert very briefly mentioned playback experiments, but these have been tremendously important in giving us windows into the social worlds of these animals that we can't have simply by watching them. And in conjunction with long-term research that gives us the kind of information we want about life histories and reproduction and survival and so on, we can then start to make these elegant connections between the rich details of their social worlds and the variation in their social worlds, and what actually goes on at the level of physiology that can have impacts on how well they survive and how well they reproduce. And in some respects, the results are, I wouldn't say necessarily surprising, but they are almost more reassuring that we now can have some very strong support for hypotheses that we think explain some of the richness of their social worlds and the variation in their social behavior.
Are there ways of collecting data that you wish you had 40 years ago that you don't have? Everybody's shaking their head. Andy, you want to say what you're shaking your
Well,
head
I
about?
was just going to say that we should have been collecting feces all the time, right from the beginning. Because
Boy, I
now
could say so many things about that. But
Yeah. Like
we
it's
would
a
know their
dirty job,
genetic
but somebody has to
relationships
do it.
much better.
Diane, did you want?
No, I was going to say, like it's a dirty job, but somebody has
Somebody
to do
has
it.
to do it. How has collection of data changed in the last over 40 years? Yeah, Diane, tell
I
us.
think one of the really important things happened. We have to remember that the whole field of primatology is roughly 50 years old, more or less, when people first started going out to study animals. And at that time, we really didn't know anything, or very much, about how animals lived. And so when you first go out, you just go out and start watching animals and see what strikes you. And what happens is you get this impression based on the very exciting things that happen, and you pay much less attention to the sort of normal day-to-day things. And even probably the most cited paper in our field is one by Jean Altman, where in the early 70s, she suggested that when people go out, they should actually look at individuals rather than just watching the group. And that's when we began following individuals and looking at how different females acted and how males acted differently than females. And that was really a fundamental thing that began changing the shape of our field.
What about the invention of the compact video camera? You know, we've seen all these pictures that we probably would have not have seen. Doctor, you want to comment on that? Yeah. Now you have a mic, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Recently I have not many hours, many days to spend in the field. So I use video and change my target of study for filming behavior, gesture language of chimpanzees, very in detail. And even if I spend 2 weeks, a lot of video, and for analysis it takes more than 2 years, only 2 weeks data.